Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We are in the final days of April. It's the point at which most seniors are now starting to think about their college decisions and starting to make those enrollment deposits at the schools that they'll be attending in the fall. We've got a great show lined up for you today. In our second segment, we'll be talking a little bit about those waitlist decisions and some of the things that students might be thinking about if they are on a waitlist and are hoping to be admitted from the waitlist. And we'll also talk a little bit about tax season, which I think is everybody's least favorite topic, but we want to explore some tax advantage strategies for saving for college, and that'll be coming up in our finance corner. But before we do that, we've got kind of a special guest here on the show today. Joining us is a real live high school senior, Jack Murphy from Massachusetts. Hey, Jack.
Hi, how you doing, Ian?
I'm doing well. I'm really glad that you're here. We were able to track you down because you are the son of the host of this show, Beth Heaton. So she's your mom. She's my boss. I hope nothing we talk about here will get either of us into any kind of trouble today. But we just want to unpack a little bit about how your college process unfolded. The first question I'm just curious about, when do you feel like the process of applying for college started? Was it just last fall? Was it many months before? When would you say it began for you?
I would definitely say that it was the process kind of started in like last spring and just kind of like began with like researching schools, and my mom kind of getting on me to be like, what schools we're looking at, and then what are you going to write about in your essay. So I think that's kind of like where everything really started for me.
And when that happened, I'm wondering, Beth has obviously supported hundreds of students through this process. You are her only child. And so this is a big deal for her as she was going through this. Did she sit you down and have a conversation at the beginning? Was it just like, oh, Jack, it's time to start thinking about this stuff? How did the kickoff process start, especially for parents who are listening and maybe have juniors right now? How did your mom approach it?
My mom just kind of, it was like one of those things where it was like, you come home from school and my mom would be like, okay, like, start looking at some schools. Like I'm going to want to have like a list by, next week. And then it was kind of like, okay, sure. And then, 2 weeks go by and you don't really have a list, but it was just kind of like one of those things where it'd be like daily reminders and, just kind of like here and there we talk in and like have little check-ins and kind of discuss, like what my priorities were for a school, her thoughts on different places I should look. But it wasn't like, sit down, okay, like let's start this process. Like, it's all going on at once. It was definitely kind of like a slow rollout in the beginning, and then kind of picked up more as, it was time to visit schools and time to, make decisions, like that. But yeah, it was definitely like a slower rollout, not like a one moment start.
Gotcha. So she didn't say, Jack, sit down. We're going to talk about college now.
No,
it was something
no.
that was just, kind of came up.
Exactly. Yeah.
From your perspective, when was the point where the idea of going to college started to feel more real? Like it was something that was really going to happen. I think it happens at different points in times for different students. Was it a visit? Was it some research that you were doing? When could you start to think about, all right, this is really happening for me?
I don't even know if it's really hit me fully yet.
Okay.
That I even
Fair enough.
am. But I would say that like, I think I went on a visit really early before COVID, my sophomore year,
Mhm.
and kind of like walking around, visited like UConn, which is nearby to us. And that was really cool to kind of like see kids on campus and to really like, think about, okay, well, I'd walk to class and I'd go to the gym here and I'd walk from here to there, and, and kind of like being able to see myself in a space that wasn't my high school and in my life. I think that kind of made it a little bit more real, and I could imagine myself in places.
Yeah.
But I still wouldn't say that I'm like fully like, oh, of course I'm gonna, like, I don't really know what's gonna happen. I don't really know if I'm fully out of my high school mindset yet. But I think that first initial visit was definitely the moment where it became more real.
Interesting. So that was back probably in like early 2020 or even late 2019.
Yeah, I want to say that was late 2019.
It's interesting. I think 2019, I was having a conversation with your mom about what your college list might look like. And she was throwing out different schools, Jack might be interested in one like this or like that. And so, but she hadn't actually started talking to you about researching colleges until almost 2 years later when you're in your junior
Yeah.
year. What was the early part, like the pre-junior year college exploration process? Was that just, we're going to go check this out and see what it's all about? Or was there some kind of homework she was assigning you in terms of your thinking process? What did that look like for you?
For me, I think it was mostly just like, well, let's go and see, kind of like different schools that are nearby that could kind of, I guess we only visited two schools before I really started visiting.
Yeah.
But it was, we visited UConn, which is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it was like, well, how did you feel about that? How did you like the experience of kind of being out by yourself? And then it was visiting BU, and less about like, well, you're going to go to BU or like, how do you like this specific school? But more like, well, how did it feel to be in a city and kind of a looser campus, which I think BU is very loose. And so it was kind of like I was able to then get a better feeling for what I actually looked for in a campus and in an environment. By seeing those two places, and it was less about the actual school and more just kind of like, well, let's get some features down, what things felt good to you, what things didn't, what'd you like, what'd you not like, and so then we can kind of move forward with a bigger list of actual schools where you're competitive and so on and so forth, that kind of thing.
So what would you say are the characteristics that became the most important for you as you were conducting your college search? How would you describe your ideal college campus? What are the features for you?
Well, I think that the kind of idea of like an actual campus was really important to me. I kind of learned later on in the I think at the beginning I was very much like, well, I want to be out in the middle of nowhere. I want to be like Penn State or something like that, where I'm out really in the middle of nowhere. But I think kind of like going and seeing more schools, like University of South Carolina was one where I visited, and it was like still very much a contained campus. It was just in a city environment. So I think that was kind of like, okay, well, it's not necessarily where it is, but it's more like, being in a contained campus where the campus is the focus of people's events. People are going to football games. People are, going and hanging out around campus. It's not about, I didn't want to go to school where it was like everyone goes off and parties in the city, or everyone's doing things off campus. That's going to be expensive. And I just kind of was like, I want something where people are doing activities at the school. There's a super passionate like population of students. People go to the sports games, people get fired up and they're fans, and I think that was super important to me. And obviously I like the green and the trees and all the pretty flowers and stuff. And being from the north, I didn't think it was too much of a concern of going to a school that was going to be colder, because I'm obviously used to that, but I definitely didn't want to go anywhere that was going to be colder than where I was at currently. So I kind of ruled out, some of the more northern schools. And, I kind of thought that was just going to be, if a school could hit those qualifying, it felt contained. People were happy to be on campus. People were happy to go to that school and proud of that school. Then those are my key things.
We were trying to get you to come out and look at Oregon State, or at least I was. I don't know if that message got to your mom, but it seemed like you wanted to be more in the eastern part of the US, right?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of felt like she totally want me to look at Oregon State. And like I had a couple schools on the West Coast initially. But I kind of felt like, almost all of my family is in the East and will remain so for the foreseeable future. So I just didn't want to be like, so far that it was a really big, really long plane ride. And it was, just so much that I couldn't even drive home in like a day if I wanted to. Right. So I kind of feel like even though a lot of the schools I was looking at were far, like 17-hour car rides, and it wasn't about, well, can I drive there conveniently? It was just like, I guess the idea for me of being able to, if I have to drive home in an emergency or something like that I could, was really important to me. I think also with COVID, kind of like you can see how things can get shut down and how kind of crazy everything can be. So I think it was like really important that, if I had to, I could go home. I don't necessarily know if I mentioned that to my mom or made that clear, but that's how I felt inside. So, yeah.
It was interesting to watch, just to hear in conversations with Beth about your college search process. It really did feel like there was a funnel. Like you started really big and then it got smaller and smaller and smaller. And you always had kind of this steady idea of what you were looking for out of your college experience. But the number of schools that fit your priorities narrowed more and more as you went and visited and got a lot of different kind of inputs and essentially grew up, right? Like what you were looking for as a freshman or a sophomore, is still fairly consistent with the schools you applied to, but I think there were some key differences as you went along the way. I want to talk a little bit about the actual process of putting the application together, especially the essay writing process. What were some things that you felt like your mom did as a parent that was really helpful for you in terms of putting your application together? And what were some things that maybe you wish she had done a little bit differently, if there are any, for the application? Maybe she handled it all perfectly.
I felt she handled it really well. Obviously,
Okay.
I'm biased as my mom. But I think that obviously like having her be, someone who has so much knowledge, I think a lot of people kind of were like, oh, well, is that scary for you? Does that make things weird? But I actually thought it made it better. Just because I trusted everything she was telling me, I knew
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't just making it up. And I hear like, after hearing a lot of the kids at my school talk about, what their parents were trying to get them to do, and, like making these claims basically off of like nothing,
Yeah.
or making, just saying like, whoa, well, this so and so got into this school, so I can get in, and they don't know that those people have connections, and there's so much deeper. So I felt like that was really helpful,
Mm-hmm.
for her to kind of to tell me the honest truth, and to not say like, oh well, like, yeah, we can apply to Michigan. I wasn't going to get into Michigan. So it's like I think she was super honest with me, and it made the process of filling out the applications and that way better, just because I knew my expectations. I knew where I was probably going to get in, and I knew what schools were going to be tough, and I had a very realistic expectation. It also helped that obviously she knows what she's talking about when she was editing my essay, because I
Right.
know a lot of kids that just have like essays, and I read them in class. I'm like, oh yeah, it looks great, and it's knowing what's good and what's not is kind of like very telling when you see a lot of kids writing stuff. So that was really helpful. But I think just kind of like managing expectations and being really honest with me, instead of trying to tell me that I was the greatest. And I'm sure she wanted to tell me I was going to get into every school. But I wasn't, and that was the best thing I think she could have done, instead of then turning into a bad thing, a couple months later when I'm getting a bunch of rejections. So
It's tough. I think it's something that we all, as counselors, we sometimes have to grapple with. Being honest with the students that we work with about what their chances are of getting into some schools. And I think it is easier when you have your child, because you can say, look, you're not going to get into Michigan. Like,
yeah.
it's hard to say that to somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't feel like you have total control over that process. But I'm glad that she felt that space that she could be honest with you. And I think it probably led to just a more balanced overall process that was less
Yeah.
stressful because of your expectations being managed. It was interesting, with respect to the essay itself. She had you talk to me about
Mm-hmm.
developing the idea. She didn't want to get in with the idea because she thought maybe she would have too heavy a hand there. But then once
Yeah.
you thought about your idea, then she helped you a little bit with your messaging. How did that essay process go once you had the idea and started writing it? In terms of getting her help and support, and knowing when to say, okay, that's enough, mom. Like, we're good. I'm ready to send this essay.
I think I was just super, like, this is your process. You're the expert. I was kind of like, I'll write down, and my mom, says she likes my writing, so I'll trust her on that.
Okay.
So I don't think that was really hard. I think I just kind of was like, okay, and I'll let her make the decisions, and obviously I'm writing it and taking the creative decisions. But I think when we would have like good conversations, and about what that editing process would look like. And I think that we had a very, healthy process of kind of like, I didn't feel like she was writing the essay for me. It was still very much my words, my essay. But I totally trusted her to make the call, about whatever needed to be done, whatever needed to be edited, what needed to be cut. So I think
Yeah.
that was a very helpful process where I really just was able to trust her, to do the right thing and
Do
do what would
you
help me.
do you remember when last fall everything was done and submitted and your process was over with?
Um, I Well, I had to submit like honor college essays and stuff, which kind of bled longer into like November.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to say that, I mean, my essay was done by early October,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, I think.
Yeah.
So,
So pretty early, like before deadlines. You weren't
yeah.
stressed about applications through Thanksgiving and through the winter break, it was like, all right, I'm
Oh
done
yeah, no.
applying to
Yeah.
college.
Yeah, I would think it was, there was like the honors college essays kind of came down to the wire. There were a couple nights where I was, typing essays and
Yeah.
like my mom, it was, the night it was due. And I don't think my mom was super happy about that. But all of my actual schools I applied to, and I got everything in a couple days before the deadline. And so I definitely felt comfortable with that. And, it was like totally burden off me when I saw everyone at school the next day,
Yeah.
kids not showing up to school that, before the big deadlines. So many kids would be missing and just kind of be like, oh yeah, well, I'm writing all my stuff in one day. So I felt really good that I didn't have to kind of do that.
Proactive and thoughtful and just
Totally.
manage that process, in part because mom said, trust me, you don't want to be one of these kids.
Exactly. Yeah. You got to get it done. Yeah.
Now, she said to me the other day that as you were sort of zeroing in on your final decision, the schools that you were considering at the end of the process were different in terms of their qualities from the ones at the start of the process that you thought you were going to like, as your top choices. Just what were the final things that you were considering as you were weighing your options, and have you made a choice about where you're going to deposit for next year?
I have made a choice. I will be going to Miami University in Ohio.
That's great.
Super excited about it. I think it kind of came down to a little bit like if I'm gonna really try to play sports and what that's gonna look like, and so where I'm gonna be able to do, continue playing football and continue what I love. Was really the most important thing to me, I think, or not the most important thing, but like was one of the biggest factors. I mean, schools that didn't have a club football team, where I knew that if I didn't, have the 1 in a million shot of making the varsity team, I was going to be out. I think I kind of ruled out schools like that, like Penn State. And so I think that was a big factor in it. And, just kind of like more going to actual, when we went and visited and listening to what the actual programs were about, and kind of like seeing the classes and being like, well, is this what I want to learn about? Do these people seem exciting? And does their message kind of excite me? So I think that was the big thing. Going to visit Miami and hearing one of their professors speak about, their sports leadership and management course. And I was like, really, I felt that it was what I wanted. He made an emphasis about teaching, and it's, and so I just kind of thought it was a really great course, and I really liked that person. And I was like, well, if this is what it's going to be like, then I'm excited about that. So I think that the actual curriculum really came into play when I had like my schools really narrowed down, where I think it doesn't before, because it's so like hard to dive into every course you might possibly be taking, especially when you don't know what you want to do. So I think like kind of ruled out everything by like, what's the most vain approach down to the most minutia, So it was like at the start it was like, well, is this a big school, and is it outside in the middle of nowhere? Okay. And it was like the most vain aspects, I would say, were the start of the funnel. And then as you kind of go down, it was the more important thing, like what's life like on campus, where are people going on the weekends? And then, down to like, well, what courses am I actually going to be taking? What am I actually going to be learning? Yeah. So I would say that's
exactly how I would coach people to think about the process. It's almost like you had an expert supporting you in terms
I know,
of
right? It's crazy how that works.
Imagine that. Jack, thanks for coming on the show. I know that this has been your process very much, but I appreciate you being willing to share it here, and also,
totally,
having your mom share your story along the way too. So congrats on Miami. I think that's fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you got it. Folks, when we come back, we're going to talk a bit about the wait list, so don't go away.